Now, previously, we've looked at how to set a background color for an element, and you can apply a background color to any element. However, with HTML5 and part of that being CSS3, we got some additional options, such as being able to do gradients for our background colors. So if you look at this website right now with that top banner, it's very plain, it's very boring. I'm going to switch over to my CSS document, and underneath my background color, I'm going to paste something I've already copied just to kind of give you a quick view of this. Notice it does say background, but it gives us a linear gradient. And in that linear gradient, we have a few different things that we want to point out. First off, we have, for example, 180 degrees. That says what direction is our gradient going to be. And this is a linear gradient. There's another one that's a kind of a circular gradient that goes out from the center. But this is a linear gradient, so it's going to follow in a certain path along a line. We then have 3 different colors that we specify. Each of those colors is actually the color. In this case, we're using RGBA, which allows for transparency if we want it. And then a percentage. And that's, if I think about my linear gradient across a distance, it says, well, how far is that color? And then we're going to let the browser interpret all the colors in between there. So 0 says, hey, we're going to start there. Then 35% says, you know what, just a little bit over a third of the way there. And I can have as many as I want going along this way. If I reload this, you notice that up at the top is that very first color, that very dark gray. Then about a third of the way down, it's that blue. And then from there, we start to see that white. So this gives us a little bit of texture, if you would, allows us to create a faux 3D look if I want to create shadows and highlights and different things like that. And I can do simple adjustments by saying where that color is going to be. Let me give you an example real quick. I'm going to leave everything the same, but I'm just going to change where that middle color is. So instead of being 35%, it's now going to be 75%. Save that, go back to our browser window, reload, and you'll notice how it takes a lot longer for us to move from that dark color to that medium color. So we have a darker color over a larger area. And then we very quickly go from that medium color to that light color. So by just changing one little value where that color appeared, it completely changes the look of it. Now, we can make other changes if we want. And let me just change this real quick. I'm going to set this to be 50% now. And I'm going to change this color to be a little bit more of a gray. So this is going to be a kind of a blue gray, very much, it's going to be a lot brighter and stuff like that. You'll see. You save that and you notice here. And so you can create some really interesting effects just by adjusting a little bit of color, adjusting where that color appears, maybe adding some additional colors. Sometimes you'll see anything from just 2 colors, and it's just a simple gradient, to maybe a whole rainbow pattern. Sometimes you'll see where there's lots of gradient and space and changes. If you repeat 2 colors at 2 different locations, then you can keep a solid color in a block. Let me show you that real quick. What I'm going to do is simply take my RGB at 50%. I'm just copying that one more time. Now the difference is I'm going to set this to be 20% and I'm going to set it to be 80%. Now what that's going to do when I come back to my browser and reload it is you're going to see that it goes from that dark color to that medium color, that keeps that medium color for a while, and then it goes from that medium color to the light color. And so this allows us to have a consistent color. And how big that is or how close those colors are all depend upon what it's going to look like. And like I said, I can apply this to any tag I want. And I can also do radial blurs. Now, we always have the question, what's it going to look like if we use it on like a cell phone versus a desktop? And is this going to slow my browser down because my browser has to calculate all these images? Well, it really doesn't slow the browser down too much if you've got a modern computer or modern cell phone. If you're dealing with something that's really old, 10, 12 years old, you might have a little bit of a slowdown. So it's probably not an issue. Now, this is something we see fairly often because we don't have to have a large image. We don't have to try to figure out how big is it going to be on different size screens, those types of things. It works really well for us. Let's look, though, how we could apply a background image to a tag. Now, just like with a background color, your background image can be applied to any tag you want. So we're going to show it on some larger tags, but they don't have to be these tags. They could be other tags as well. Now, I've gotten a couple of images for us to look at to use as a background. Some of these work better than others, and I want you to think about why these might work better than others. We're going to start with this one. Now, you might look at this and go, well, this is a nice and it's kind of a peaceful image. It's relaxing. This might work great as a background image. But I want you to think about what's going to display on top of it. The thing you have to remember about a background image is it needs to work with what the content is going to be. And so I've got sections of dark, like on the upper right-hand side. I have sections of very light colors, such as that puffiness of those clouds. And I have high contrast areas where my color changes drastically from one point to the next. So while this might look like a good background image, and it might be good in some areas, like maybe a header that doesn't have a lot of text, this actually may not be a good background image. Now, this image, you might look at and go, okay, is this going to be good? Is this going to be bad? It's got some areas of contrast in those corners again. But notice that in the main center where I could put actually most of my content, it's pretty consistent in its coloring. So I don't get those high areas of contrast right there. I can maybe use my padding to come in a little bit. So this one might work well. Now this one's almost exactly the opposite. It's very, very dark. And you may or may not see actually some texture in it. If you kind of look at it closer, you can tell. And so people might think, ooh, is this going to be good or is it not going to be good? It very much depends upon how is it being used. So with this, I obviously cannot put black text over it. But white text would work very well for it. And so I have to ask myself, is that what I want? Now, a light colored text, whether it's white or a light gray, doesn't matter, that is harder to read. And so I'll need to increase the font size and some other things, maybe use certain fonts, not others. Maybe that just show a little bit bolder by default, or maybe that are a sans serif type of font just so it's easier to read. But this could work for a background image. Like I said, kind of depending upon how you use it. So let's see how we're going to put a background image into place. You notice at the very top I have my body tag. Since I can choose background, and this background property is a shorthand notation. It includes most of my background properties. So when you see like background color, background image, and background position, that's all included in background. So this is the one I'm going to use. I like to use this because it's a little bit simpler. The first thing I'm going to pick is the background color. That's going to be the first attribute I'm going to put in there. I want it similar to the color of my background image. If I have an image that's kind of all over, it makes it really difficult to figure out what should be there. So I'm going to choose that dark colored image. So I'm going to pick the 3, 4, 5 because it is a dark blue. And this is kind of a really dark gray blue. So that's going to work for this. I'm then going to say URL. This is going to be the reference to the URL for the image I'm going to have. And I'm going to pick .images and then the color vintage paper, midnight black. Okay. I'm going to choose no dash repeat. This means don't repeat my image. So it's going to stay there. I'm going to choose fixed. That way my background does not move. By default, it's going to be attached to the object. So if you scroll, it's going to scroll with you. And then I'm going to specify top, which is the top location or at the 0 point of my containing element, and left. So this gives me a couple of things. I'm not going to repeat this image. I'm going to be fixed in location, and I'm going to be starting in the top left-hand side. So my image top left side starts at the top left side. Now I can pick some other starting points, and I can actually go in and specify some locations. I'm not going to do that right now. Okay, so this is my body, and remember it's a dark color. So I'm going to come right here to my images. When I reload this, notice that the things that have a background color already, like my header, my footer, that is sitting on top of it. You can see this background color a little bit, but all my text disappears. So let's see how we're going to fix this. There's a couple things we're going to do. I'm going to scroll down to my main. Right now inside my main, all I have is padding, but I'm going to choose background color. I'm going to choose RGBA. And the reason for choosing RGBA is this is going to give me my RGB values plus the A, which is alpha. So red, green, blue, and alpha. Do I want to make this semi-transparent? I can also do a hexadecimal and give it 4 values. So once again, 2 values for my red, 2 for my green, 2 for my blue, and then 2 for my alpha. So either one of those is going to work. I want to choose a very light color. So I'm going to choose FFF. Remember, this is shortcut for FF, which is pure white. And then I'm going to choose A. And what that's going to be is that A is just going to be mostly opaque, just a little transparent. And if you look at that little box, you can see how it's kind of that really light medium gray because it takes the white and then lets you see just a little bit of what's behind it. If I come here, you can now see this. You get a feel for it. So you might think in looking at it, it's like, you know what, that's still kind of dark. I want to adjust it just a little bit. So you can come in here and adjust it. Now we've used the padding so far to come in, and the padding shows that background. So if I want to see a little bit of the background image, then I need to add some margin. And I'm not going to mean margin top or bottom. So I'm going to say margin 0, just like I have padding 0. But then I'm going to specify I want some margin on my side. So I'm going to choose 35 pixels. If I do that, you can see how it comes in a little bit on the sides. I can choose to come in more if I want. The background color is lighter, so it's easier to read that text. I still have that background color. Now there's a few other things that I can do. So right now this background image is really, really wide. If I come over here to this image and right click on it to come to my properties, I can find out, okay, this image, you know what, it's about 1.3 megs, 1.4 megs almost in size. And if I go to details, I can see that I'm 3,600 pixels wide. Well, my browser screen's only about 1,200 pixels, 1,400 pixels wide. So what's happening is because I'm starting that top left-hand side, my image is shoved all the way over there and it's not going all the way out. So I'm losing a huge chunk of that image. It's just out there. I can't see it. So there's a couple ways that we can fix this to allow us to see more of our image. What I'm doing is just simply going up to my body. I'm going to choose background size. Now my size allows me to specify how big is this background image going to be. And I can mainly type in some values, but there's 3 that I typically use. Auto, which is a default, and that's kind of a 1-to-1 size or 100% if you would. That's the default, but we need to change that up. The 2 others that are commonly used is contain, and this is going to scale our image. It's going to try to preserve the aspect ratio of both the height and the width. We also have cover, which is going to do it. The idea that's different though is the contain is going to try to fit the whole background image into that containing element. The cover is going to try to fit the image into the containing element, but it may have something left over in the height usually. So it wants to display the whole width. It's going to try to display as much height as it can to cover, but it's going to make sure, and the most important thing is that the whole containing element is covered. So I'm going to choose contain real quick. Sometimes for some pages you'll find that they do basically the same thing. Sometimes you'll find they do very different things. I'm going to reload this. Notice that because that image was square, it says, hey, we got to show all of that image. Notice that it put the whole image in that square, but now we have a whole section where it's empty. Okay, that's the issue with contain. Contain means that we may have some areas of background which are not shown. Here we have cover, and I'm going to reload this. And what you may or may not notice in here is that it's covering the whole element. However, we're not seeing all that image down below. Okay, so it's going to fit it, preserving the aspect ratio, going to cover the entire containing element, but some of the image is going to be disappeared. So kind of does the exact opposite of contain and cover. You got to be careful with which one you use, because sometimes it's really important. Now, I have used contain in certain instances where I say, you know what, I want as much of this image to display, but afterwards, towards the bottom especially, I know that's going to fade out, and I'm okay with that. And so, in fact, I'll usually put a little of gradient on it. I'll go into a photo editing tool. I'll put a little bit of gradient on it so I can see it's going to white as a background color, or whatever my background color is going to be. And then I have my regular text and stuff in there. So it really depends upon what is it that I want to use. But this is a great example of that. If I scroll back to my main, and I might say, you know what, I want to really see that background color. I'm going to make that a 3. When I reload it, now you can really see kind of that texture that's behind the scenes. It does make the text hard to read, so we're probably not going to use that. Let's look at a different color that we might use, however. So instead of the images with the dark black, we're going to use the light yellow. This is kind of a vintage paper type of look. I'm still going to keep the same color on that main. So when I reload, you can notice that you see a lot more of that texture come through because it's lighter. I didn't have to put a heavy opacity on it because the background color was light. And so I just put a little bit just so that the texture part doesn't overwhelm the text, making it hard to read. So those little things like that, little tricks like that, and how I stack my elements and put a background image on one but not on another, or maybe I put a background color on one and a background color on the other, those all work together to give us a better viewing experience. And so those are the types of things that we're going to do with our background images. We're going to look at positioning them. We're going to look at using contain or cover depending upon what our needs are. We might need to adjust them a little bit in our position, maybe center them, those types of things. Whatever you need. The idea is we want to make sure that our content is still clearly visible, and any background image that we use is going to enhance the website based upon what we're expecting. Now you might say, well, what does that mean? Well, when I come to this website, I'm going to ask myself, what is the type of website I have? If I have a very ultra-modern type of website and I got really clean lines, I don't want an old-timey parchment type paper for my background. On the other hand, if I'm doing maybe online scavenger hunt or I'm doing a website about a pirate theme, this old-timey parchment type of paper might be great for trying to put maps out there and talk about the history of, that online scavenger hunt or the pirate that inspired it or whatever it is that's going on. So I'm going to think about what's my content and find the right type of images to help me do this. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I just went to a completely different page, sample3.htm, that had a lot of text on it, and you can see how this works. Okay? Because there's so much text, Notice I didn't have to go and make more changes to my CSS. You might think, well, why didn't you? Well, because I applied it to an external style sheet and I used tags that were being used everywhere. Body tag, the main tag, all that stuff was still there inside that page. Notice that because I set my image to fixed, as I scroll, my image doesn't move. So I get a lot of other things that you can see with this. Whether or not you want an image to move as you scroll your text is very much dependent upon how your background image is being used, what type of image it is, etc. In this case, because we have layers on top of it, I think it works just fine with something like this. I might ask myself, does my header background color and does my footer background color, do these match this idea for this image? And I have to think, you know what? Probably not. So I might want to look at changing those things up just to make it a little bit easier and better to work with. I might say, you know what? Maybe I go back to that dark color and it's easier to kind of match those. Whatever I choose, I'm going to try to do the best that I can. There are lots and lots of elements on a web page, and they can all have their own background color and background image. So are you limited to what you can put in a background? Not really. Are you limited to where you can put backgrounds? Absolutely not. So think about those types of things as you're developing your website. However, you also remember a lot of times these images are larger, and so they might slow down the downloading of your web page, and that might be something that you and your users won't like. So be mindful of that as well. When you're looking at a local machine, it's obviously really, really fast. When you put it up on a server, when you have to deal with your download speeds and try and figure out, is it download speeds for a cell phone or download speeds, maybe a slow internet connection, those types of things can affect you. So figure out what makes the most sense in your application and use it from there. All right, that's all we have right now for backgrounds. Keep all those things in mind, and we'll see you in the next section.